Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Injury Law Pod. I am your host, Eric Bartlett, 28-year personal injury lawyer, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things personal injury law related. And today, up on this episode, we're going to talk about a weird, tragic situation that occurred here in the Kansas City area. You probably have seen it in the news. It's been back in the news recently, and it involves the chilling wrongful death case that's come out of the Chiefs watch party that actually occurred up here in the Northland of Kansas City. And today we're going to we'll dive in a little bit about the facts of the situation, and then we're going to break down the legal theories behind the lawsuits that have been filed, how criminal law and civil law intersect, and whether the families can actually recover anything if they win. Obviously, you file a lawsuit, that's your goal, is trying to get compensation. And what's the reality? What does that look like? So, to give a little bit more background in case you haven't heard of this situation or you've only heard bits and pieces, on January 7th of last year, there was a small group gathered at the home of Jordan Willis in Platte County, and they were there to watch a Kansas City Chiefs football game. And among the guests were Ricky Johnson, David Harrington, and Jason Feltz. Another man, Ivory Carson, was also present. And then afterwards is when things got weird. Basically, according to the news reports and civil filings, Willis and Carson provided fentanyl and cocaine to the guests that were at this party. And in these lawsuits, the plaintiffs, the people bringing the lawsuits, are alleging that these drugs were ingested knowingly, but were laced and far more dangerous than the users expected. Now, the really wild part of all this is how it unfolded. So on January 9th, so a couple days after this gathering, police responded to a call at Willis's home and discovered the three men's bodies in the snow-covered backyard. So Willis had not been answering the door. I think one of the people that had died was either the girlfriend or the wife had come over prior to that to see where he was, got no answer. So anyway, police were called, they show up, the police find these three bodies in the backyard. Rigor mortis had set in, suggesting that they had been left unattended in the backyard for a while. And again, as we know now, it had been a couple days and nobody had called the police that lived at the house. So it took somebody else making the effort to have the police get involved. So the aftermath of this was that a criminal case followed. Both Willis and then Carson were charged with involuntary manslaughter and delivery of a controlled substance. Then on the civil side, 4 wrongful death lawsuits have been filed by the victims' families. And the most recent was filed by Norma Chester, who is the mother of Ricky Johnson, and she seeks damages on behalf of herself and Johnson's 3 minor children. This case raises questions about accountability in informal settings. So when somebody has a party, a gathering, what does that look like as far as the host responsibility? And it also raises questions about liability for drug use and distribution and how civil law can respond when criminal penalties may not go far enough. So let's talk just a quick minute here about criminal versus civil. Most people, because of TV, know that a criminal case requires the state to obviously prosecute the crime, and the standard to find somebody guilty is beyond a reasonable doubt. It's a very high standard that the state must meet to essentially take away somebody's life and liberty. You're going to put them in jail or you're going to put them in prison. So it's a very high standard. And meanwhile, on the civil side, it's a lesser standard because here we're not taking away somebody's life or liberty. We're seeking monetary damages, compensation. And so there, the preponderance of the evidence is the standard. And that's the world that I work in. So when we are bringing a claim against somebody, if we get in front of a jury, we have to prove our case by a preponderance of the evidence. So what does that mean? If you look at it as a scale, basically the scale just has to be tipped ever so slightly in our favor to make the claim. Okay, so it's not even necessarily 51%, it's just above 50%. That's what is required for us to be successful at trial. And a lot of people may not think that's fair, right? A lot of people may think that's too easy, but that is the standard. And that's the standard by which I operate and by which we pursue claims. Now, when we're putting a claim together, we're working to shift that scale dramatically in our favor, but the law doesn't require that. So you have to understand those two different standards when you're looking at these types of cases. And again, this is one of these interesting things. Another good example of a case that might involve criminal and civil would be a drunk driving situation, right? We've had cases where we represent the victim of a drunk driving accident. The person that we're making a claim against, the state has brought criminal charges against them for the drunk driving, and then we're filing a civil action against them for the drunk driving. And so you got these two separate legal actions going on, maybe at the same time. And again, it's just really important to understand the difference, the two separate arenas of the law, and the different standards that are involved. So the state obviously has a very high standard. And again, you got to remember this. A lot of people say stuff like a person was proven innocent. Well, that's not exactly true in a criminal situation. Right now, the law presumes a person's innocence until proven guilty. But that's the key. The state has to prove guilt, or a jury has to find a person not guilty. Okay. And so it's different than finding them innocent, because basically it's just a matter of whether the state proved the elements necessary to find guilt. And again, they may not have met those elements. Again, they're at this high standard of beyond a reasonable doubt. There can be no doubt. There can be no question that scale looks like this. That's what it has to end up for the state to find somebody guilty. But in the civil arena, again, the goal is compensation for the family rather than punishment, unless punitive damages are involved, because punitive damages are monetary damages awarded to punish the wrongdoer. But unless those are involved, it's compensation. That's what we're looking for, trying to reimburse people for everything that they've lost because of someone's negligent behavior. So in this particular case, there are some different theories surrounding the negligence of the people, Willis, who was the host of this party, okay, and Carson, who was an attendee of the party. And the allegations look like this in the civil arena: that these two men supplied illegal drugs. They failed to warn the people they were giving these drugs to about the risk of these particular drugs. and that they failed to help as symptoms developed with the people that had ingested these drugs. Allegations include allowing hazardous substances to be present on the property and failing to take reasonable steps to protect their guests. There's also allegations of what is called negligence per se, which negligence per se is basically the legal theory that you violated some law that was in place to protect the people that are now making a claim against you. And so, even though there's a law out there and it might have criminal penalties, if you violated it, a civil action can follow from the violation of that law. And so, in this particular case, the allegations are they violated the Controlled Substances Act, and specifically that they've violated the Missouri law against the delivery of controlled substances, that they didn't have any prescription authority to distribute these controlled substances, and again, that there was drug distribution without the appropriate licenses. So again, if these allegations are proven that they violated these laws, then these violations basically serve as automatic proof of negligence under Missouri law. There's also premises liability theories that are being alleged against the host of the party. So essentially, the people making the claims are alleging that there were dangerous conditions of the property, which is the fentanyl and cocaine as known lethal hazards on the premises, and that the host are liable for failing to protect their guest from the foreseeable dangers of these hazardous drugs. And then finally, these are wrongful death claims. So, what is being sought in a wrongful death claim is funeral and any medical expenses that came about. I doubt in this there were any because, again, as we know, these three people that died, there was no medical care ever provided. They died and they were left there. But also in a wrongful death claim, there is the loss of companionship of the person, the instruction that person provided in someone's life, and the financial support that they provided. And also, there's emotional distress of the surviving children and parents. Finally, in this particular matter, punitive damages have been alleged. And again, they're alleging complete indifference and conscious disregard for the safety of the people that died. And again, the idea is to punish the wrongdoers and also deter similar future conduct by others. So punitive damages carry a different realm of consequences. And it's not only for this case, but it's to work to deter this kind of conduct from happening in the future. So, what are some of the legal issues and probably defense strategies at play in this kind of a lawsuit? Number one, there's going to be assumption of risk, and that is, will the defendants argue that the guest knowingly accepted the danger when they voluntarily took these drugs? Comparative fault, I've talked about this in many different episodes in Missouri. You can compare the fault of the person that you're suing as against the person making the claim. And it's a spectrum of 0 to 100%. And so a jury, when they're presented with this case, they could put all the fault on the alleged wrongdoers. They could put all the fault on the people that died, or they can do anything in the middle. So they could make it a 50-50 split, 70-30, 60-40, 75-25, anything. they can split the fault between everybody that's involved. And the way that works is if any fault is put on the people that are making the claim or on behalf of the people that are making the claim, then whatever the jury provides as compensation in their verdict will be reduced by that same percentage that fault was placed on the people that died. So, easy example, if it's $100,000 verdict and the people that died are assessed with 50% of the fault, and then the people that are having the claim made against them are assessed with 50% of the fault, that $100,000 verdict will be cut down to $50,000, and the judge will do that. They're probably also going to argue that there's no duty to rescue someone. So normally there is no legal duty to help somebody, but this changes if the danger was created by the defendant. So that defense is probably not going to be very strong in this situation, since the allegations are the defendants are the ones that supplied the dangerous drugs. And then more than likely, there will be a joint liability argument that both men that are being sued, the damages can be split or collected from either one. And there's some particulars in Missouri law about how that unfolds. But generally speaking, you're trying to hold both parties responsible, and you're trying to make it so that either one of those two parties, you could go and collect your damages after a jury renders a verdict. You can collect from either person, whatever the amount is. So in a situation like this, where would the money come from? Let's just say a jury awards a large sum of money as compensation for the losses sustained by these families. So realistically, where does the money come from? More than likely, you're probably not going to get anything from the person personally. And we see this a lot. So you can get a judgment against somebody, right? A verdict can be rendered, a judge can enter the judgment, and then you have essentially a piece of paper signed by the judge saying this person owes you whatever amount of money. But there's a lot of kind of stipulations or rules about how you could actually get the money out of a person that you have a judgment against. For example, if they're married, if the person that you got a judgment against is married, then anything they jointly own with their spouse is not subject to using that to satisfy the judgment. Okay. And again, one of these guys probably owned that house. How much does he actually own of it? Does he have a mortgage on it? Is it jointly owned? Are you going to be able to sell the house and get some money out of that? Who knows? Bank accounts, again, if the bank account is jointly held with a spouse, you cannot use that. You can garnish wages, but again, there's a good chance this person's not going to be working anymore. If he's found guilty on the criminal side, he's going to be in prison. And so there's not going to be any income coming in. So it's very hard. And again, you're going to be looking to see what assets the person has, property, vehicles, savings accounts, whatever that looks like. But there's huge hurdles in trying to get that money. The other problem is bankruptcy. If you get a large verdict, judgment against somebody, they can file for bankruptcy. Now, if it involves punitive damages, they cannot take that out in bankruptcy. But otherwise, if it's based on negligence, then they can. And again, you have this piece of paper that says they owe you money, but realistically, are you going to get any money from them? And I've already talked about trying to garnish their wages, things like that. So where is the most realistic opportunity to get money? If there's a homeowner's insurance policy, then there's a good likelihood that insurance policy will cover the damages that would be awarded. Now, the problem is those have limits, right? And for example, the liability limit on this person's homeowner's insurance, it might be $100,000. And if that's it, that's all there is realistically that you're going to get. And if you accept that money from the insurance company, let's say we're talking settlement. Let's say this hasn't gotten all the way to a jury and the homeowner's insurance is offering up whatever the money is that's available through the insurance company. If you take that money, you're going to have to release the person you're making the claim against. And you can't go above and beyond that. So a decision has to be made. Do you take the sure money? Do you reject the sure money and go get the verdict, judgment, or at least try, right? There's no guarantees at all. So all this stuff has to be factored in if settlement is discussed. And again, we run into this all the time. This is why a personal injury lawyer has a job. Number one, it's to go find the money, it's to go get the money, and then it's to make the decision and counsel clients on what is the best route for recovery. Now, obviously, there can be a symbolic value to getting a judgment, going and getting a verdict and then a judgment against someone, because even if a recovery is limited, judgments can validate a loss and create legal consequences. But again, these are all decisions that have to be made on a case by case basis, depending on what the entire scenario looks like. Is this a single individual you're making a claim against with large assets? Okay, that could change the equation. Is this somebody that, once you've looked at their financial situation, you realize they don't have the money or you're never going to get any money to truly satisfy a judgment? And now you do have a homeowner's policy and that insurance company is offering up money that is guaranteed money at that point. So lots goes into the decision of how to proceed with these lawsuits. The other thing is this: there's multiple claimants here, and there's only so much insurance, because generally speaking, insurance policies are written so that there's an individual limit amount and there's an overall limit amount. So for example, there might be $100,000 per person, $300,000 for any and every body that's making a claim out of this incident. So if that's the case, and you have three families making claims, and there's only so much insurance, and that's going to have to be divided up, that's going to weigh into exactly what you do, how you proceed, and whether you take the insurance money or push on down the road. So this is going to, in my opinion, these particular cases, again, there's three of them, they're going to have some interesting legal ramifications that arise. It's not obviously every day we see a situation like this. And I think we're going to be looking at trends in civil liability tied to drug use and overdose deaths. Again, I think we all know we have a major fentanyl problem here in the United States. We have a lot of overdose deaths occurring. And this is one example of where this occurred. And so what does it look like when somebody is the responsible party for getting somebody else drugs that aren't what they expected, that have this fentanyl, which is extremely dangerous, highly likely to kill somebody? It doesn't take much at all to do that. So what is this going to look like, and how far does this go? Again, there's always an appellate court process depending on what happens at the trial court level. And this could end up providing law down the road that drives future cases and how they're viewed and handled. And again, it's going to involve the role of social host and their responsibility and their liability. Are we going to see an expansion of duty that social hosts have in casual environments? And then it's going to be interesting just to see how, as the criminal and the civil cases progress through discovery, which is where people are taking depositions and there's documents exchanged, things like that. If a trial occurs or if settlements occur, it's just going to be interesting to see how all of this comes together between the criminal and the civil trial, because there's discovery in both. And it'll be one to keep an eye on for sure. Just as a sort of final recap and takeaway, these cases involve wrongful death, drug law, premises liability law, and obviously deep personal loss. It's a very tragic situation. Again, obviously, nobody wanted this to be the final result, but this is what happens when people don't exercise the appropriate care and judgment. And a question that's going to come out of this that people should be thinking about is, should providing drugs at a private event open the door to civil liability if tragedy strikes? It's interesting, right? Because you've got people who are knowingly taking drugs, and drugs in and of themselves are dangerous. But then the question becomes, if you're taking a drug that had something extra in it that created an even higher risk of death, and it led to that death, what does that look like? So it's going to be interesting. I'd encourage you to stay up to date on the developments that go on with it. I may do a podcast down the road once this is all settled out and revisit what happened with it. But it's a really interesting case combining a lot of different elements. And again, it's things that we see all the time. Obviously, we don't see these particular issues. At least I have not. I've never had a case with these types of facts. But as I've already mentioned, we have cases where there's a criminal element going on, there's the civil element going on, and we might even be working with the prosecutor to see what they're getting as far as evidence, and they may want to know what we've got. And yeah, just encourage everybody and be careful and be safe and know what you're doing and taking. And again, everybody's got to be thinking about these things. Everybody wants to have a good time, but be smart. And so, till next time, again, as always, if you find yourself in any kind of a situation and you've got legal questions, there's an injury, there's a death involved, you can always reach out to us. We're always here. It's a free call. And otherwise, until the next episode, be safe, stay well. I'll talk to you then.